Hi, everybody. This is Bob Gale, co-creator of Back to the Future, and you're listening to Brad Gilmore.
Doc! Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Martin.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know he did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
Whoa, this is heavy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time with the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore. Sorry if I came in a little bit hot there at the get-go. We have a good episode for you all today. We are going to be talking about the most frequently asked questions to the Bobs about the Back to the Future series. This is something that I'm sure some of you listening may have seen before. Others, if you've never perused backtothefuture.com, that's curated by Stephen Clark, perhaps you haven't seen it before. Some of these questions seem obvious to people like us who dive deep into them, but just because something is obvious, or really because something is obvious, sometimes it's the most frequently asked thing. And that is what we're going to be breaking down today, the most frequently asked questions. I'm going to get a second here to plug a couple of things. I'm going to plug the collection with Brad Gilmore. I got brand new episodes up with a lot of great folks. Go over and check that out. Hall of Fame with myself and Booker T. Always talking about the latest goings-on in the world of professional wrestling. Clue the Movie podcast, man. We're like over a third of the way into the show. And the way that show works is we break down Clue the Movie from 1985, the other movie that Doc Brown was in, playing a professor, no less. We break that down 1 minute at a time. So we watch a minute of the movie, and then we talk about that minute and only that minute. But sometimes Jeff and I get a little bit off topic. But nevertheless, people love it. I love doing that show so much. You can go check that out. And I've got a couple other shows in the pipe. It's coming, man. They're coming. But right now, we're going to get into the most frequently asked questions from the Back to the Future series here on Back to the Future, the podcast, Season 10. Enjoy. Okay, so I have right now, it's a very simple web address. It's backtothefuture.com/movies/FAQ. FAQ is frequently asked questions, FAQ. So I'm going to read the little preamble here, and then I've picked out a couple of my favorites, and we're going to read through several of the most frequently asked questions from Back to the Future. So let me take a sip of water here, and here we go. The most frequently asked questions from Back to the Future by Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis. This is them speaking. We get letters and calls, and when we meet fans, and we meet fans, and a lot of them have questions. Some of these questions are perceptive, some are naive, and some are, well, pretty dumb. Some are from, that's kind of mean. Some are from, there's no such thing as a dumb question. That's what they taught me when I was a teacher. Some are from time travel fanatics who ask for explanations about the mysteries of the space-time continuum. Some are from children who want us to send them a hoverboard. Our favorite was from an 8-year-old boy. Please send me a hoverboard, but don't send me a pink one. And here are some of the most frequently asked questions about all three Back to the Future films, and here are their answers. So Back to the Future Part 1 looks like it only has one frequently asked question. This is pretty incredible. You know, we might be able to read all these. Here's the question, and this is a frequently asked one. In the Darth Vader scene, Marty has a modern hair dryer tucked in his belt. Obviously not something they had in 1955. Where did this come from? First off, I am shocked that that's a frequently asked question. Good eyes on who's ever looking at the modern appliances that were available in the Darth Vader scene. Okay, so we're talking about where Marty's trying to convince George to go to the dance with Lorraine, and he knows that George is a fan of science fiction theater and things of that nature. So he goes in and pretends to be Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan. And that was his in to convincing George that he was a being from outer space, and if he didn't do it, he was going to melt his brain, and he had the Eddie Van Halen tape, right? Okay. So he did use the hair dryer. Let's see. And this is the answer. Does anyone know the answer? Okay, I gave you a second. Do I know the answer? Because before I hit the plus sign, do I know the answer? If I were to guess, was there a hair dryer? Was there a hair dryer in the suitcase that Doc packed? I want to say that there was. And if there's not, I mean, we didn't see everything clear as day in there. There could have been. So that's the only other way, unless there was just one, because Marty didn't bring anything with him except for the camera, the radiation suit. So that would be the only way, unless Doc had one in there for Einstein, or Doc could have had one. I feel like he had one in his suitcase, but he could have had one to like heat up the DeLorean when it got back because it was so cold. No, that doesn't make sense. The hair dryer was in. Okay, here we go. Here's the answer. The hair dryer was in a suitcase that 1985 Doc put into the DeLorean trunk at the Twin Pines Mall. There was a scene in which 1955 Doc looks through the contents of that suitcase, picks up the hair dryer, and says, "What's this?" Marty says, "A hair dryer." Doc shakes his head and says, "A hair dryer? Don't they have towels in the future?" However, that scene was cut from the final film from Time. Yeah, didn't we talk about that? I feel like we talked about that. Let's pull that up real quick. Didn't I talk about that with Frank? You know, you do this show so much, you forget about these things. Hair dryer scene from Back to the Future. I feel like that's, yeah, we did look at this.
So, these are my personal belongings, huh?
Yeah.
What's this thing?
It's a hairdryer.
A hair dryer? Don't they have towels in the future? Hey, look at these underpants. They're all made of cotton. I thought for sure we'd all be wearing disposable paper garments by 1985.
Yeah, okay, I remember that scene now. So yeah, I was right. It was in the suitcase, right? That was in the suitcase. So there you have it. Okay, what's the next question here on the podcast? So that was the only frequently asked question for Back to the Future 1, which is kind of surprising. But here we go for Back to the Futures 2. If Griff is Biff's grandson, how come we never meet Biff's son? It's a great question. He wasn't in the movie. Maybe he was in prison? Biff's son was in prison. That's going to be my guess here. Actually, it was never established whether Biff has a son. Since we don't know what Griff's last name is, Griff could be the son of Biff's daughter. Oh, well, yeah, there you go. Back to the Future 2, frequently asked question, are hoverboards real? No. Hoverboards do not really exist. This is the most asked question we get in letters and phone calls. Yes, director Robert Zemeckis did give an interview in which he said hoverboards were real, but this was done tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, of course. Nevertheless, a lot of people believed it, including some executives at one of the 3 major television networks. We'll say it again, hoverboards are not real. But based on our mail, there's a tremendous demand for them, so maybe some enterprising inventor should get to work. Yeah, I mean, everyone wanted one of those. I know what they're talking about. I think it was during the making of the movie, they had Bob Gale sit there, and he's like, oh, yeah, we got them before they were released to the public, and blah, 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 blah. Where can I get a pair of those self-lacing shoes Marty had? You can't. It's purely a special effect. If anyone's ever seen the picture of all the people on the ground when they do that, it's pretty incredible. And those shoes do not really exist as far as we know. Nike has no current plans to develop such a shoe, but they ended up doing it. You can get power laces. What happened to old Biff when he staggered out of the 2015 DeLorean? Well, we know this, but let me read from this here. Our intention regarding old Biff was that upon his return to 2015, he would be erased from existence because he had changed his entire destiny by giving his younger self the sports almanac. Probably Lorraine shot him sometime around 1996, is in parentheses. After old Biff clutches his chest and staggers, the same symptoms that Marty exhibited in Back to the Future when he was beginning to be erased. We actually filmed him falling onto the street and vanishing, and we previewed the movie this way. However, the vast majority of the audience did not understand it, so we decided to cut it out, leaving the answer ambiguous and subject to various interpretations. Besides the above explanation, you can believe that old Biff had a heart attack from the shock of time travel or from the flying car or from something that happened to him in 1955. Yeah, it is ambiguous, and I think that that's somewhat endearing. I've done a lot of research about this. I wrote a whole chapter about this in the book. We've done a couple of podcasts about it, and I think that they should have left it in, but I totally get why they didn't, because so few people are going to go through the extra mile of trying to figure it out and really putting thought into it. A lot of the times for a movie like that, especially a blockbuster movie, you got to kind of let them know what's going on, especially if a major character vanishes, and Biff is a major character in Back to the Future. So, that, I mean, they made the right decision overall, but selfishly, I wish they would have left that scene in. Here is the next frequently asked question from Back to the Future 2. When Doc and Marty are in 1985, Doc says they can't return to the future to stop Biff from stealing the DeLorean because it would be the wrong future. But if that's true, how did old Biff manage to get back to the same future in which he left? Shouldn't he have come back to the different future? So I think that he did come back to a different future. But again, that's why they should have cut it. If they didn't cut it, I mean, they shouldn't have cut it. If they didn't cut it, we would have known he disappeared, and he disappeared because he's changed the events. And remember, we know that it changes around them. Like with Jennifer, the future changed around her. When they went back to 1955 and came back, there were no bars on the doors, and she was still asleep on the bench. Here's the answer. As should be clear from the answer to the previous question, we believe old Biff did indeed return to a different future, a 2015 like I just said, which would have transformed around Marty, Doc, Jennifer, and Einstein, just as Doc explains how 1985 would change into 1985 and instantly transform around Jennifer and Einstein. This would happen after old Biff returned with the DeLorean. For this reason, we made sure that Doc had caught Jennifer and exited the McFly townhouse before old Biff returned. Thus, by the time Marty and Doc are carrying Jennifer to the back of the DeLorean, there could be other residents that in that townhouse. Oh, sly. Or perhaps the McFly still live there. It is just as believable that the physicality of the neighborhood did not change as it is to believe that it did, so we didn't change it. We decided not to make anything of this idea because this is one of those difficult time travel concepts that general audiences have a hard time understanding. Trying to explaining this stuff to your mother and you'll see what I mean, and a detailed explanation of it would have slowed down the story, and most of the audience doesn't ever think about it. True. That is why we made certain things ambiguous and left various things open for interpretation in hopes that the possibility of at least one or two explanations would be better than a definitive explanation that you could find holes in. Let's face it, time travel is a fantasy, so there's no way to prove anything. As filmmakers, we try to create a set of rules for our stories and stick by them and stay consistent within the little universe that we've created. All right, here's the next one. When Doc and Marty leave 2015 and go back to 1985, the time display show that the last time departed in November 12th, 1955, 6:38 a.m., which must be the same time old Biff left 1955. But since he gives himself the almanac much earlier in the day, what was old Biff doing for all of that time? I mean, just looking at a reality in which he used to live in. The extra hours were designed into the time display for a simple production reason. At the time we filmed the sequence when Doc, Marty, and Jennifer leave the future, we still weren't sure whether the scene where an old Biff gave young Biff the almanac would be day or night. We left room on the time displays so that we'd be covered if that scene took place at night. Man, they were really thinking. Our thinking as to what old Biff might have been doing for those extra hours included two very believable possibilities. One, Old Biff, having never traveled through time, decided to do a little additional nostalgic sightseeing before returning to the future. 2, depending on where old Biff hid the DeLorean, he may have had to wait for it to get dark before he could leave. Makes sense. For example, to avoid being spotted by the police who could have shot at him. Okay, definitely, that all makes sense. They really thought about that, man. The extra hours, I mean, that's pretty incredible. Okay, we have 5 more from Back to the Future 2. Then we'll get to Back to the Future 3. Doc says that if Jennifer sees her older self, it could create a time paradox that might destroy the universe. Please explain. Okay, this is a bit of a long one, so here we go. First of all, let's define time paradox. A time paradox is a situation in which the effect of an incident contradicts or eliminates the cause of that same incident. As example, imagine that in 1990, 40-year-old John Smith goes back in time 30 years and finds his younger self aged 10 in 1960. Suppose 40-year-old Smith pulled a gun and murdered his 10-year-old self. Jesus, this got dark. Then 10-year-old Smith would never grow up to become 40-year-old Smith. How could then 40-year-old Smith go back in time to murder himself? Thus, the effect of the incident, the murder of a 10-year-old Smith, eliminated the cause, the existence of the murderer. A paradox, by definition, is impossible. In the case of Jennifer, the shock of seeing herself old causes her to faint. But what if young Jennifer had hit her head on a cement stair, suffered brain damage, and died? Then she would never grow up to marry Marty. They would never have kids, and Doc would have never had a reason to bring them into the future in the first place. And if Jennifer never goes back to the future, how can she die in the future? Also in Back to the Future, if Marty had actually been erased from existence by never having been born, he would never have existed to grow up, go back in time, and interfere with George being hit by the car. For the record, many scientists use the time paradox concept as an argument as to why time travel has to be impossible. Since time travel allows the possibility of a paradox, and since a paradox is impossible, time travel itself must be impossible. However, in the Back to the Future films, time travel does exist. Thus, Doc surmises that if a paradox were indeed to occur, the result could be a cataclysm of some sort. On the other hand, since a paradox never truly does take place in the films, it could just mean that there is some sort of self-preservation mechanism in the cosmos which prevents a paradox from ever happening. Perhaps then, this is the reason that both Jennifers faint to prevent a potential paradox. Look, these are some thinking boys here. They're putting their minds to this. All right, let's go to the next one. When Doc takes Marty and Jennifer out of 1985 and brings them to the future, how can old Marty and old Jennifer and their family even be in the future? Wouldn't their disappearance from 1985 instantaneously erase the future? When Doc, Marty, and Jennifer takes Marty and Jennifer out of 1985 and brings them to the future, how can old Marty and old Jennifer and their family even be in the future? Wouldn't their disappearance from 1985 erase their future? To be honest, here's the answer. I don't know. To be honest, here's the answer. Yes. It should erase their existence from the future. This is, in fact, the ultimate paradox of Back to the Future Part 2. We really thought about this one for a long time, but we decided that after the setup of Doc saying something's got to be done about your kids, the audience would feel cheated if we went to the future and found out they didn't exist. You could, however, argue that the existence of old Marty, old Jennifer, and their kids in the future automatically proves that young Marty and Jennifer will eventually get back to 1985. I agree with that. Oh, but there's a flaw in it. The flaw in that reasoning is that Doc repeatedly tells us that the future hasn't been written. So why would this part of their future be written? But Back to the Future Part 3 may contain the answer to that question after all. When Doc spots the tombstone in 1885 and sees that the name on the photograph of the tombstone has vanished, but the date remains, he says, "We know this photograph represents what will happen if the events of today continue to run their course into tomorrow." That's a pretty big if. And it suggests that time travel to the future always takes you to a future based on the events of the time you left, a logical extrapolation of what the future of the moment holds. Of course, the existence of free will allows for the possibility of infinite futures, which is what Doc says at the end of Back to the Future Part 3. Your future is whatever you make it. But time travel into the future takes you to the most likely future of the moment you left. I like this explanation, and it makes sense to me. Like, I follow that logic. What about y'all? The next question. Why is it that Jennifer faints when she sees her future self, but Biff has no problem when he meets his future self? Let's think about that one before we look at the answer. Jennifer faints when she sees her future self. Well, they both faint, but let's just say, okay, Jennifer's fainting because she sees herself old. And old Jennifer faints because she's seeing herself young and doesn't know about the existence of time travel. Old Biff knows about the existence of time travel. Young Biff doesn't know that that's him, 60 years from now. And old Biff is seeking out young Biff. And he remembers what he looked like in the 50s, so I don't think he'd be shocked by it. Let's see what the answer is. Jennifer definitely realizes she is seeing herself 30 years older, and that's what puts her into shock. Young Biff, however, has no idea who old Biff is. He really thinks it's some old codger with a cane. By the way, codger, great word. Here we go. What is the significance of a pair of backwards nines of fire left behind when the DeLorean is struck by lightning? I don't know if there is a backward nines. Aren't those just like tire marks? Like tires, spinning? Let's see what the answer is. When the big bolt of lightning hits the DeLorean, it sends the flying vehicle spinning on its axis. As we already know, the DeLorean leaves fire trails behind it, so when it travels through time. Since this is the case, the car was spinning, the fire trails are left behind as spirals instead of the usual straight lines because when the car is moving straight ahead. Yeah, so it's just they're spinning. How could the DeLorean travel through time when it gets struck by lightning if it isn't going 88 miles per hour? The sudden rotation of the DeLorean... Oh, I'm reading the answer already. The sudden rotation of the DeLorean from the lightning hits... The sudden rotation of the DeLorean from the lightning hit accelerates it to 88 miles per hour when it spins. Okay, yeah, pretty simple there. Okay, so that's Back to the Future 2 and 1. Let's see if I can get back and see Back to the Future 3. My screen's all zoomed in. Okay. Back to the Future Part 3 has a couple. Let's go through these. These are some great questions. I hope y'all are enjoying this because I've learned a couple things. All right, Back to the Future 3. Leah Thompson plays Maggie McFly, Marty's great-great-grandmother, as well as Lorraine, Marty's mom. But Lorraine's family name is Baines. Why did Leah play Marty's paternal great-great-grandmother when she's really not part of their family? Is there something kinky going on in the history of the McFly family? My answer to this, probably the real answer, is you want Leah Thompson in the movie, right? And you want to have that scene where she wakes up. You're safe and sound now on the McFly farm. It's a bad Irish accent, and I'm actually Irish. And then I guess the fun answer, before I click it, would be the McFlys have a type, man. They got a type. But let's see what the answer is. Leah plays Maggie because we didn't want to make it a Back to the Future Part 3 without having Leah in it, especially in a Mom Is That You scene. Bah! Got it. Of course, we thought about whether it made any sense. Obviously, Maggie McFly and Lorraine Baines cannot be blood relatives, but we did come up with a satisfactory answer. It's a well-known adage, men are attracted to women who remind them of their mothers. Clearly, then, when Seamus married Maggie, that ensured that McFly men would have a genetic trait that attracted them to women who bear resemblance to Maggie or Leah Thompson. Even Jennifer is the same physical type. Ooh. Yeah, physically, sure. By the way, OG Jennifer still reigns supreme. Love Claudia Wells. What's up, Claudia? I hope you're doing well. How could Clara have erected the tombstone for Doc after September 7th, 1885, if she was supposed to go on over the cliff on September 4th? Ooh. At the beginning of Back to the Future Part 3. Would the name of the ravine be Clayton, Shonash, or Eastwood? Okay. So we know if the events of today continue into tomorrow, right, it would affect the future. So we knew eventually she would be saved. And in the tombstone, That is a hard one. So, well, look, but Doc was on the way to go visit her no matter what. Oh, here's the explanation. Doc was in the original timeline was never supposed to go back to 1885, right? But since he's there, the mayor asks him to go visit Clara Clayton, who's the new school teacher. He goes to meet her, and whereas no one was around before to save her from the ravine, Doc is now there. Okay, we've established that. So she was going. So Doc going back at the end of Back to the Future 2 changed the fact that she was going off the ravine on September 4th. So he was always going to save her after that moment. Now it was altered again when Marty showed up in 1885C, I guess it would technically be, right? The original timeline is where Clara goes off the ravine. That's 1885A. 1885B is when Doc is introduced into that hill valley. And then 1885C is when we see Marty go back to save Doc. So that's how he would have saved her. At the beginning of Back to the Future 3, would the name of the ravine be Clayton, Shonash, or Eastwood? Well, at the beginning of Back to the Future 3, it'd be called Shonash. Let's see if I'm right. Okay, here we go. Oh, I love it. I love it. Version 1, original history. The original history occurred before Doc was ever born or invented the time machine. This is how things would have been written in history books in Back to the Future and in most of Back to the Future Part 2. August 29th, 1885, Hill Valley Town Meeting. No one volunteers to meet the new school teacher at the station. September 4th, 1885. Clara arrives at the train station. Since no one is there to meet her, she rents a buckboard. While heading out to the schoolhouse, a snake spooks the horses. They run wild. The buckboard goes out of control, and over the edge of Shonash Ravine, Clara is killed. Clara Clayton is killed. That reminds me of the Johnny Carson and Jack Webb bit from The Tonight Show. The clean clappers. Go look that up if y'all don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, September 9th, 1885, a memorial service for Clara Clayton. The city fathers decide to name the ravine in her memory. The Shonash Ravine becomes Clayton Ravine. Again, version 1 is the history of Hill Valley that happened before the beginning of Back to the Future. At the conclusion of Back to the Future Part 2, Doc is zapped back to January 1st, 1885, where he settles in Hill Valley as a blacksmith, and the above events are altered because of his presence as follows. So I think I'm right about this. Version 2, 1885, Doc in 1885 without Marty. August 29th, 1885, Hill Valley Town Meeting. Doc volunteers to meet the school teacher at the train station. September 4th, 1885, Doc meets Clara at the train station, and they fall in love at first sight. September 5th, 1885, Doc takes Clara to the festival. Buford shows up and shoots Doc in the back with the Derringer. Despite Clara's efforts at nursing him, Doc dies 2 days later from internal bleeding as a result of the gunshot wound. And on September the 9th, 1885, Clara dedicates Doc's tombstone in loving memory from his beloved Clara. In this sequence, the name of the ravine remains Shonash Ravine. Simple. This history ripples into the future after Doc is struck by lightning at the end of Back to the Future 2. Marty, however, retains his knowledge and memory of the original history because he has come from a point in the space-time continuum in which the original history applied. If Marty were to go back to the ravine in 1955 at the beginning of Back to the Future Part 3, on his way to the Pontchartrain Drive-In, for example, he would discover the ravine is called Shonash. Man, that would have been a great little reveal, like in the background. Like if you catch it, you catch it. In Back to the Future Part 3, Marty's trip to September 2nd, 1885, alters version number 2 as follows. So here's the third version of events. So we're about to get the answer of what the ravine is called. August 29th, 1885, exactly the same as in version 2. Doc volunteers to be the school teacher. September 3rd, 1885, is seen in Back to the Future 3. Marty shows Doc the photo of the tombstone. Doc decides not to meet Claire at the station. That's why she's left standing there in the background. This is so good. September 4th, 1885. Claire arrives at the station. No one is there to meet her, so she rents a buckboard as in version 1. Similarly, on her journey to the schoolhouse, the snake spooks the horses, and they run wild toward the ravine. As seen in the film, Doc rescues her from going over into the ravine. They meet and fall in love at first sight. September 5th, 1885, at the festival, Doc's behavior is now different due to his knowledge that Buford is going to shoot him in the back, which is why Doc keeps facing front to Buford. Because Buford never does shoot him at the festival, and due to Marty's interference, the name of the tombstone vanishes. September 7th, 1885. Clint Eastwood is apparently killed when the runaway locomotive plunges into the ravine. In honor of his heroic action against Buford Tannen, the city fathers decide to name the ravine after him. Incidentally, there is some alternative scenario that may have occurred in version number 2. On September 15th, 1885, Clara, distraught over Doc's death, commits suicide by jumping into the ravine. As a gesture of sympathy, the people of Hill Valley decide to name the ravine in her memory, thus putting the space-time continuum back into a similar situation as in version number 1. We will remain ambiguous about whether this suicide incident actually happened in version number 2, so that the viewer may choose whichever scenario fits into their own theories about time travel. That's strange. So it's called, at the beginning of the film, it's called Shonash Ravine, right? Okay. Got a couple more. Doc Brown of 1955 learns a lot about the future from Marty. Shouldn't the Doc of 1985 remember all those things that happened in 1955? I say yes, but let's see what they say. 3 possible answers, all credible. Number 1, the ripple effect of time travel, which caused all the photographs to change, does not affect human memory. Okay. 2, the 1955 Doc suffered a memory loss sometime after his adventures with Marty. Maybe it was the drugs he took in the 1960s as Reverend Jim. Funny. Love that. 3, Doc actually did remember everything, but still did all the same things he remembered because he didn't want to risk disrupting the space-time continuum. Okay. There's a 4th possibility, which depends on your view of time travel. There's a theory, we like to call it self-preservation instinct of the space-time continuum theory, that says the continuum is always trying to keep itself on course, and when things happen to change it, it always tries to correct itself. It is much like a river, which tries to keep its overall course. Although earthquakes, fallen trees, floods, and other circumstances may disrupt it at points, the river would cut through a new channel so that it ends up back in the same place. Thus, the overall physics or metaphysics space-time continuum would ensure that any of Doc's memories of the events that might create paradoxes would become hazy or be erased. I like that theory the most. If anybody watched 11/22/63, which was the time travel series they did on Hulu with James Franco, was it Franco or Dave Franco? Was it his brother? It was one of the Franco brothers. They kind of had the same thing, that if you try to alter the future tries to, alter you, essentially. In 1885, when Marty tells Doc they're out of gas, why don't they just go to Delgado Mine, dig up the DeLorean where Doc hid, and get the gas out of it? Oh, that's interesting, because there are 2 DeLoreans there. What's the answer to that? There are 2 logical answers to this one. Now remember though, Doc may have, when did he put it in the mine? Could have been in there for months. Let's read, because it could be bad gas. The car mechanic's answer: as anyone who has stored an automobile for a long period of time can tell you, you always drain all the fluids out of the car before pouring it into storage. Doc most certainly would have drained the gas out of the DeLorean if he was going to leave it hidden for 70 years. At the 1955 drive-in, Doc specifically says, "I put gas in the tank," indicating that the DMC must have already been empty when found in the mine. Duh. 2, the time travel theory answer: even if Doc had drained the tank, he still would not have gone back into the mine for fear of creating a time paradox by accidentally damaging the DeLorean, the mine, or who knows what. After all, since Marty is now back in 1885, Doc's plan obviously worked and worked perfectly. But what if Doc were to go back inside the mine and accidentally cause a cave-in that causes even more damage to the DeLorean? What happens to the future of that DeLorean when it's unearthed in 1955? What might that do to Marty and the undamaged future DeLorean now in 1885? As an analogy, imagine a time traveler goes back in time, finding himself as a child and cutting off that child's hand with a meat cleaver. Man, they're really dark with these analogies. What happens to the adult time traveler's hand? That would definitely risk a time paradox, and we know that Doc would never go out of his way to risk such a thing in fear of, in the worst case scenario, unraveling the fabric of the space-time continuum and destroying the universe. Makes sense. Couple more questions here. In Back to the Future Part 3, Doc smirks when he learns that his future dog is named Einstein. Yet, in Back to the Future, Marty videotapes Doc's time travel experiment with Einstein. In the 1955, Doc watches the tape. Oh, so he should know, right? Since Doc's reaction to Einstein in Back to the Future Part 3 indicates he did not know about the dog, we can only assume Doc never watched that portion of the tape or didn't pay much attention to it. I'd say he didn't watch it. I don't think they got to that. And then there are two general questions. What are some of the details to look for in repeated viewings? Oh, here we go. As a ton of fans know, all three films contain lots of details, some of which are not evident until you watch the movie more than once. Here are a few things you may not have noticed. In Back to the Future Part 2, very difficult to read, is a sign in front of the Biff Tannen Museum that says smoking required. Hilarious. In Back to the Future Part 3, Doc's bandana is made out of the shirt he was wearing in Back to the Future Part 2 when he got sent to back to 1885. Yeah, always saw that one. In 1885, Honest Joe Statler deals in buying, selling, and trading horses in Hill Valley. In Back to the Future, the name of the Toyota dealership is Statler Toyota. And in 1955, the Studebaker dealer is Statler Motors, which can be seen on a billboard at the drive-in in Back to the Future Part 3. Obviously, the Statler family has been in the transportation business for a long time. Yeah, you see this with Jones Manure, too, and manure hauling, A. Jones and D. Jones. In Back to the Future Part 3, at the drive-in, the three films playing, listed on the marquee, were all sequels and all Universal films. Very, very funny. In Back to the Future Part 3, when Marty and Doc are at the train station looking at the map of Shonash Ravine, Clara is seen standing in the background. I talked about that earlier, with her back to us, waiting for someone to pick her up. That someone was Doc. Finally, the last question. Is there going to be a Back to the Future Part 4? I think we all know the answer to this one, but I'll read what they say anyway. We have no plans or desires to make a Back to the Future Part 4. We think we've taken Doc and Marty through an odyssey that's rounded them both out as complete characters, and which also suggests they'll both have fine futures. We developed and executed at almost every time travel idea that's ever interested us. And we feel that another Back to the Future would only get stale and hackneyed. Excuse me. After 5 years, the filmmakers and the cast are all ready to try other things, and we prefer to end the series on a high note. So this was obviously written some time ago. But those are some of the questions, the most frequently asked questions of the Back to the Future series. How many of them did you know the answers to? How many of them did you first learn about these answers for the first time? And now how many of you are going to go watch all three Back to the Future movies tonight and try to find more frequently asked questions? I would love to do a Pinheads edition of the show. If you have a frequently asked question or a theory or something you've always wanted to know about Back to the Future, send me an audio note. Send me an audio note that I can play here on the show, and we'll go through the answers of the space-time continuum and time travel together. But until next time, this has been Back to the Future, the podcast, the only podcast looking back in time at the greatest film trilogy of all time, Back to the Future. I'm your friend in time, Brad Gilmore, and I will see you in the future.